All right, good morning, everyone. Andrew Nielsen here with My HR Council with our Wednesday new format short webinars. We're going to start today on a journey of ERISA compliance. We're going to break this into 3 successive webinars. Today we're going to focus on a little bit of the background and history and why ERISA is important, and then we're going to move on in the next couple weeks in terms of who's covered, what you have to do, documents, stuff like that. Like I said, we're going to try to keep this a little short, shorter than a normally hour long webinars that I normally am used to. So what we're going to do without any more blathering on my part is just jump right into it. Again, this is what we're going to cover in the next 3 weeks. I don't expect us to get super far today, but we're going to get as far as we can and keep it at a comfortable pace. Should anybody have any questions, I think you can just throw them up in the chat box on the side. And if I can't see them, Dan will bug me and let me know all about them. But what we're going to do is dive right into the history of ERISA. So I don't know if anybody recognizes this car. If you had showed me this picture, before I went to law school, or probably even, 10 years after I went to law school, I would have told you I have no idea what kind of car this is. I can tell you with certainty now that this is a Studebaker. And some of you out there might be saying, Nielsen, what the heck does a Studebaker have to do with ERISA? And that is an excellent question. Studebakers have a lot to do with ERISA, believe it or not. And we're going to talk about exactly why. So ERISA comes to us in 1974, and it comes into being mostly in part because of the shutdown of the Studebaker manufacturing plant in South Bend, Indiana. So in 1963, Studebaker shut down their manufacturing plant in South Bend, and when they shut it down, it turned out that all the money that they had saved for pensions for those employees that were working in that manufacturing plant wasn't really all there. And so I guess in blunt terms, they insufficiently funded the pension plans, which meant that these workers who had been working with the promise of being paid a pension for retirement and their golden years, the pension was kaput. And so they had been working for nothing in terms of retirement. And what happened is that the plan failure here led to concerns about pension plan corruption and mismanagement, which led to reforms and regulations, which led us to ERISA, hence the picture of the Studebaker on slide 1. But I mean, that's probably an oversimplification. In all fairness, JFK, when he was president, started with a presidential commission in 1961, looking into pension plan failures and insolvency of retirement plans. Because Studebaker wasn't the first, it wasn't the last, it was definitely one of the biggest, and it got a lot of attention because of the scope of employees that were affected. But JFK's presidential commission didn't get a lot of traction until this Studebaker disaster happened. And because of the visibility of it, it led to, it spurred on the movement. And one thing to remember, actually 2 things to remember, is this, you're like, well, they don't have a pension. I don't have a pension either. Back then, there were no 401ks. 401ks didn't come into existence until ERISA was signed into law in 1974. Or actually in 1978, I'm sorry. And IRAs came about because of ERISA. So people back then couldn't have a 401k and they couldn't have an IRA until ERISA was signed into law. So unless they were saving on their own, their only options for retirement were to rely on Social Security or to get a pension. And if their pension plan, one of the legs of that stool that their financial plan was built upon, wasn't there, they were kind of SOL, to be honest. Pensions were the majority of what these employees had for retirement. So it was a big deal back then. All that nonsense and all the congressional hearings and all the investigation and all the bills led us to where we are today, which is with ERISA. Now, ERISA stands for Employee Retirement Income Security Act. The retirement part is a little bit of a misnomer. That's not to say ERISA doesn't handle retirement. It absolutely does. Retirement and was one of the big reasons ERISA was passed, as I just talked about. But it goes a little bit beyond the scope of just retirement. And if you look at the slide here, ERISA is governed by the DOL and the subunit of the EBSA. And the primary goal here is to ensure the integrity and compliance of employee benefit systems. Notice it says employee benefit plan systems, not employee retirement systems. That's because when ERISA was written into law, it is in a scope that covers more than just retirement plans. It covers health and benefit plans, which is what we're going to focus on mostly these next 3 weeks. It's a federal law, if that wasn't obvious, because of the DOL's involvement. And I guess the bottom line is the purpose of the law is to set minimum standards for retirement and health plans, and to provide protections for the individuals, for the employees that are participants in those plans. All right, here's a little more technical mumbo jumbo on it. We are going to, again, most be focused on Title I. There's lots of different titles of ERISA. We're really going to focus right now on Title I, which is the employee benefit plan sections. And here are some of the things that it requires. It requires detailed disclosures to individuals, which are plan participants. It's going to require some reporting to the government, especially depending on your size. Those requirements are going to be either minimal or more involved. It imposes a strict fiduciary code of conduct on those who sponsor and administer ERISA plans. So this is basically targeted at those individuals at companies like Studebaker who mismanage the funds by either rating the pension fund to fund daily operations because they were not operating at a profit, and so they needed to steal money from somewhere else in order to keep the business alive. And it basically penalizes people for doing that, and companies as well. And it imposes a federal mechanism for enforcing the rights and duties with respect to ERISA plans. And because it's a federal law, it preempts, that is, state law. And so if there's a conflict between state law and federal law, ERISA is going to win. So even if your state might have a little different law on some aspect that touches ERISA, ERISA is going to say, we don't care, we're the feds, we swoop in. All right, so now that we know a little bit about the history of ERISA and kind of what it covers, now we're going to focus on who is covered by ERISA. So there's a whole bunch of words on this page, and I think we can sum it up to a quite simple definition, is that ERISA is going to cover every employer in the world, in the country, except for those that are either a governmental entity, and there's a super long definition there, or if you're a church plan. And church plans we're going to get to in a little bit, but even if you're a church and you have a plan, there's a potential that it could not be a church plan, or a religious institution could not have a church plan. So even if you're a religious institution, you might, there's still a chance you could be covered. But like it says, it covers every single private business, no matter the format. Could be a corporation, could be an S Corp, C Corp, LLC, partnership, you name it. nonprofit is going to be covered under ERISA for the most part. And so we talked about ERISA and the R being a misnomer and R being for retirement, and that we do more than just retirement under ERISA. And again, we're talking about welfare benefit plans here. So welfare benefit plan is a pretty simple definition that the feds give us. It's basically a plan, a fund, or a program established or maintained by an employer, and that is established to provide welfare benefits to participants and their beneficiaries. And so this is a pretty broad definition if you think about it. You know, any sort of plan established by an employer to provide welfare benefits. So what kind of plans would those be? I got some examples right here. So here are some examples of benefit plans that are subject to ERISA. You know, we're talking your basic health, dental, and vision plans. You see those all the time, whether they be fully insured or whether they be self-insured. We're talking about, you know, HSAs, potentially FSAs, HRAs, AD&D insurance, group life, short-term STD, LTD, severance insurance policy. Don't see that a lot anymore, but it can happen. You can have a severance plan that would be covered by ERISA that covers if there's a certain benefit to employees upon separation of employment based upon years of service. If you've established such a plan, that's going to be covered under ERISA. That's an oddball one, but it happens. EAP plans, wellness plans, and the big thing is any sort of pre-tax benefit is going to be covered as an ERISA plan. So we're going to talk I think on the next slide actually, or maybe in a slide after that, about voluntary benefits. And voluntary benefits are a special exception to the ERISA rules that is much debated amongst companies. So here are the certain plans that are exempted from ERISA. I think this is going to be our last slide today, so that we don't bite off too much more that we can chew, and to keep this thing under 15 minutes. But the safe harbors and exceptions to plans, like I mentioned before, government agencies, church plans, those are going to be exempted from ERISA. Programs maintained solely to comply with state law requirements. You know, like I said, if you're in a state like Wisconsin, Minnesota, where you have to have work comp insurance, you know, that's going to be a plan that's going to be exempted from ERISA compliance, as opposed to those states like North Dakota and Washington, where the state runs the work comp program and you just pay into the state. Unemployment compensation, that's going to be exempt from ERISA, because if you look at the definition of it, potentially it could be, it could fall under that. But you being required to pay the state, SUTA and FUTA is not going to be considered to be an ERISA benefit. Some disability insurances and plans maintained outside the U.S. for non-aliens. So basically, if you have an employee in France and you have a benefit plan in France for that employee, that's probably not going to be covered because it's not a US-based plan. With that, we're going to take a pause as we're about 1/3 of the way through this deck, and we're going to pick it up next week, same date or same day, same time, to focus on some other things such as why employers are out of compliance, what is actually required by ERISA, and how you meet those requirements in order to stay in compliance and not get into trouble. I don't see any questions on the side. Dan, if you let me know if there's any questions over there that you see, I can go ahead and address them. Otherwise, next week, same bat time, same bat channel.
Yes, I'm not seeing any other questions. Thank you everyone for attending today, and we look forward to seeing you for part 2 of our ERISA series next week at noon Eastern time. Thank you.